They say Saturday evening is when the veil is thinnest. I didn't believe in folklore until I saw the iron gates of Aina Gar. The mansion loomed over the North Bengal fog like a decaying titan. My name is Rahul, and I'm a researcher who values logic over superstition. But the moment we stepped onto the porch, logic felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. There was no wind, yet the heavy oak doors creaked open as if exhaling. My sister, Aditi, gripped my arm so hard her knuckles turned white. The local villagers wouldn't even point us toward the driveway. "Don't look at your reflection," the old chaiwala had warned us. I laughed it off at the time, thinking he just wanted a bigger tip. Now, looking at the dark windows, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. The house didn't look like a building. It looked like a trap. Its lime and brick walls were stained with moss that looked like dried blood. We had to go inside to settle the estate papers for our late uncle. He died in his sleep, or so the official report claimed. But the neighbors said he died because he forgot how to breathe. As we crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. I reached for my flashlight, but my hand felt oddly heavy. The silence inside was so thick, it felt like physical pressure on my eardrums. "Do you hear that?" Aditi whispered, her voice trembling. I listened, and for a second I thought I heard a low, rhythmic thumping. It sounded like a massive heart beating somewhere beneath the floorboards. I told her it was just the old pipe settling in the humidity, but deep down, I knew the house was acknowledging our arrival. We were no longer guests. We were fuel for whatever lived here. The first thing you notice about Aina Gar is that it's not built for humans. The hallways stretch out in ways that defy common architectural sense. I looked down a corridor that seemed maybe 20 feet long. We walked for 5 minutes, and the door at the end didn't get closer. It's called the House of Mirrors, but there isn't a single mirror in sight. The reflections come from the walls themselves, smooth and pulsating. I checked my watch to see how long we had been exploring. To my horror, I noticed a second watch on my left wrist. I only own one watch, a silver Seiko I've had for years. This second one looked like it was made of pale, translucent skin. The hands were tiny slivers of bone ticking in perfect rhythm. I tried to pull it off, but it felt like I was tearing my own flesh. "Rahul, look at the wall," Aditi said, her voice barely a gasp. Her shadow was cast against the damp lime wash by my flashlight, but her shadow had 2 heads, both tilted at an impossible angle. When she moved her arm, the shadow waited 3 seconds to follow. The house was trying to impose its own twisted symmetry on us. Everything singular was being threatened by an unwanted double. I felt a sharp pain in my jaw and tasted something metallic. I spat into my palm and a molar fell out, covered in black bile. Before I could panic, I felt a strange pressure behind my ear. I reached up and felt a hard, calcified ridge growing under the skin. It felt like the tip of a new tooth erupting from the wrong place. The house was fixing the asymmetry of my missing tooth. It didn't care about my anatomy, only about its own grotesque balance. The air began to change as we moved deeper into the central wing. It didn't smell like the damp rot you'd expect from an abandoned mansion. Instead, it was the cloying, sweet scent of thousands of Rajnigandha flowers. It was the smell of a high society funeral, expensive and suffocating. Underneath that sweetness was the sharp metallic tang of fresh blood. Then came the sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. A distant, low moan of a conch shell echoed through the vents. In our culture, a conch shell signifies an auspicious beginning or a prayer. But in this house, the sound was distorted, like a scream played backward. "The house is hungry," Aditi whispered, repeating the villagers' words. Suddenly, the floorboards began to shift beneath our very feet. The walls didn't just move, they slid like muscle fibers over bone. We tried to run back toward the entrance, but the hallway had vanished. In its place was a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. From the shadows, a faint humming sound started to rise. It was a lullaby our mother used to sing to us when we were babies, but the voices were small, high-pitched, and sounded like they were underwater. I shone my light on the floor and saw the Alpana children's ghosts. They weren't floating. They were etched into the floor like chalk drawings. Their eyes were hollow pits that seemed to track our every movement. As they hummed, I felt a stinging sensation in my fingertips. I looked down and saw my fingernails beginning to curl and peel. They were opening up like the petals of a dying hibiscus flower. No blood came out, just a clear, viscous fluid that smelled like iron. We were becoming part of the house's decoration, layer by agonizing layer. We were trapped in the Takur Dalan, the grand inner courtyard of the estate. The pillars here weren't made of stone. They were wrapped in human skin. I could see the faint outlines of rib cages beneath the smooth, tan surface. They were breathing, slow, shallow breaths that vibrated the entire room. That's when I saw the shadow of the guinea on the northern wall. She was massive, her silhouette stretching from the floor to the ceiling. Her shadow had 3 distinct, spindly arms that moved independently. One arm reached out and brushed against the shadow of my own legs. Instantly, I lost all sensation from the waist down and collapsed. My legs weren't paralyzed. They just didn't belong to me anymore. I watched in horror as my own feet began to rotate 300 degrees. Aditi tried to pull me away, but the shutters on the windows rattled. The shutterman was there, hiding behind the wooden slats. I saw a single elongated eye peering through the gap in the wood. He breathed out, and the sound was a rhythmic, wheezing gasp for air. Each of his breaths made the room grow smaller, the walls inching closer. "We have to leave now, Rahul. Please stand up," Aditi screamed. I dragged myself across the floor using only my fingernails. The floor felt soft now, like walking on a giant waterlogged tongue. Every time I touched the ground, the house let out a low groan. We reached a door that we thought led to the servants' quarters, but when we opened it, we were looking into the same courtyard again. We were caught in a loop of non-Euclidean geometry and madness. The house was folding in on itself, and we were the filler. The realization hit me that there was no outside left for us. By the time the moon reached its peak, the house began its final fix. I looked at Aditi, and I realized her face was becoming perfectly symmetrical. Her left eye was moving to match the exact position of her right eye. Her nose was centering itself with a sickening sound of cartilage snapping. She didn't scream anymore. Her mouth was being sealed shut by new skin. I looked at my own hands and saw the fingers merging together. The house wanted us to be perfect pillars for its decaying structure. The black, viscous liquid began to seep from the cracks in the ceiling. It wasn't oil or water. It was the concentrated sorrow of the previous victims. It pooled around our ankles, warm and thick like fresh blood. I reached for my pocket knife, hoping to end this before the transformation finished. But the knife had turned into a piece of rusted iron fused to my palm. The logic of the physical world had been completely replaced by the house. I heard the guinea's voice for the first time, a sound like grinding stone. "Everything must have a pair," she whispered, inside my very mind. I felt a duplicate of my heart starting to beat in my right chest. The immense pressure, my ribs cracking to accommodate the new organ. I looked up and saw a person bent into the shape of a chandelier above us. They were still blinking, their eyes wet with tears of pure exhaustion. Their skin had been stretched thin to hold the candles in place. I realized then that the house wasn't haunted by spirits at all. The house was a living, breathing organism that used souls as insulation. It needed our life force to keep its impossible geometry from collapsing. My vision began to blur as my eyes started to migrate toward my temples. The last thing I felt was the floor rising up to swallow my legs. The floor was no longer cold. It was warm, feverish, and it was swallowing me. It wasn't wood anymore. It was a hungry, porous membrane. My legs were gone, buried deep within the foundation of the house. I tried to scream, but the air in the room had become thick and syrupy. Aditi was beside me. Her lower half had already vanished into the tiles. We were becoming human anchors for this cursed architecture. The shutterman's wheezing was getting louder, closer than before. Every time he exhaled, the walls groaned in a strange, rhythmic harmony. I looked at the palms of my hands, now fused to the floor. My skin was turning a pale, waxy gray, identical to the lime wash. I could feel the house's history flowing through my veins like ice water. The screams of the children were no longer external. They were in my mind. They weren't just humming. They were chanting names I didn't recognize. I realized the house was sorting us, deciding where we fit best. "Make me a window," I heard a voice whisper from the ceiling. It was a faint, distorted version of a man who must have died decades ago. The ceiling above us began to ripple like the surface of a pond. I saw faces, half-formed, stretched, and agonizingly symmetrical. Looking down, they weren't ghosts. They were the structural integrity of the wing. One man's spine forms the archway of the door we just tried to open. His eyes were wide, and he blinked in time with the shutterman's gasps. There is no death here, only a slow, eternal redistribution of self. My left arm suddenly jerked, the bone snapping as it repositioned itself. The house wanted my limbs to mirror the cracks in the masonry. I watched my own fingers elongate, turning into the very slats of the shutters. Aditi's mouth was gone now, a smooth plane of skin where her lips used to be. She looked at me with those perfectly aligned eyes, and I saw a plea for death. But the house doesn't allow for such a simple escape from its service. Her neck elongated, her vertebrae clicking like a string of prayer beads. She was being pulled upward, toward the corner where the walls met the ceiling. I realized she was being shaped into a bracket, a support for the roof. "Stay with me," I tried to say, but my voice was a raspy whistle. The scent of Rajnigandha intensified, making my head spin with vertigo. It was the smell of something beautiful.